Look, it has to be water off a duck's back. What anyone ever says about your work, take no notice. You're your own best critic. I mean, generalisation is the worst enemy of art. My sculpture always seems to make more fuss than my paintings.
Do you think death is beautiful?
I don't want it to happen yet. You see, the studio is what I call real time, and all the rest is the rest. Whatever happens outside the studio door is just life.
Oh, it's Maggi Hambling. And then he said, but it looks like a Chinese ink brush painting.
Been making trouble again, I see. But I don't set out to be controversial. No. It just happens.
Welcome to Pearl and Podcast. I'm sitting here today at Maggi Hambling's studio. I would love to introduce the artist Maggi Hambling and her very good friend and art critic Louisa Buck. Maggi, please talk a little bit about yourself.
Well, I like to laugh.
I know.
You know, because I live in a permanent state of doubt about my work and doom, and it's very odd. You could have a whiskey at 6 o'clock thinking you've had a good day in the studio, and you look at it the next morning and it's shit. And then you could have a whiskey at 6 o'clock thinking you've done nothing but shit all day, and you look the next morning and it's not bad. I mean, there are just no rules.
Because every time you look at a work, you feel differently. For every artist, after they finish the work, they need to take some time to go back to see the work to give an objective view. Is that right?
Absolutely right. And a mirror is very useful. You see, because when I'm actually at it, the whole thing is so subjective. But then you look at the reflection in the mirror of what you're doing, and that is objective. And you can tell whether you've got an ear coming out of an eye or something like that.
So when you look at your work, do you look at the mirror reflection, or do you look at the work itself?
I look at the work itself and the mirror reflection.
Both. Oh. Let's talk about you, Louisa. You are an art critic. And then how do you start? And then, you're talking about art and art with social issues, like conceptual art.
I'm an art journalist. I'm the contemporary art correspondent for the art newspaper, and I also work for all sorts of different people as well. The BBC. I used to present a radio show for the BBC, and still do a lot. I mean, I very quickly realised I wasn't going to be able to be an artist myself. I had nothing remotely interesting.
But you study art.
I studied at university. I went to Cambridge and then the Courtauld Institute. And I knew that I loved art and I loved artists, but I wasn't going to make anything of interest myself.
But you didn't want to be an art historian?
Well, I did. I have a kind of qualification as an art historian, but what I really loved was meeting artists, talking about their work, seeing their work, writing about it, being an academic. I have a very low concentration and patience threshold, so that wasn't really ever going to be for me. And so I'm very lucky. I've spent, the last few decades meeting, interviewing, talking to artists. But yes, the social, economic, political issues, art's about the world. Sometimes it's relevant to talk about these things. Sometimes it's not. It depends on the art. It depends on the artist. But art is part of the world we live in. Artists are part of the world we live in.
Culture.
Maggi has made extraordinary works that refer to conflicts and war and all kinds of climate issues. They're not just about that. Of course they're not. But they feed in because we're all human beings in the world that we're in. So I feel like I want that to be reflected in what I cover and I write about as well.
So when you approach art, when you approach how you paint in a portraiture, do you have the same approach with your landscape?
I don't do landscapes, madam.
I mean, like the wall of water, which is water, right?
Yes.
So seascape. What would you say?
It's all the same. It's all the same. I had a show some years ago called Portraits of People and the Sea. And somebody said to me that there's one recorded statement that Rembrandt made, which is, I have painted nothing but portraits. So that means the tiniest chicken coop in the tiniest etching was a particular chicken coop. I mean, generalisation is the worst enemy of art. And so every mark has to be precise and discovered every time. That's what is so difficult.
Because when when I saw your work, it makes me think about the Chinese ink brush painting. I mean, especially, when I have your work at the Westbourne, at the art fair, and they were walking. A lot of people have seen your work before because you had the show in Kava and you have the show in the Guangdong Museum. So they came and then they said, "Oh, it's Maggie Hambling," and then he said, "But it looks like a Chinese ink brush painting." I mean, when you were doing the work, did you actually have being inspired, or have you ever looked at a Chinese ink brush painting, or you just do your gestures?
No. I mean, I have studied.
Oh, you studied.
I've studied it in the British Museum, looked at it, enjoyed it, and that whole Eastern thing of it being as important where you don't make a mark as where you do make a mark. And so as I've got older, I try to say more with less, be more economic.
More economic, fewer words, much stronger.
I think it's so interesting too that every day, Maggie, you do an ink brush painting, drawing in your studio with your left hand to get you started.
Yes.
Oh, really? Using left hand? How wonderful.
Well, it's like a pianist doing the scales, because painting obviously is not just about colour, it's about the touch of the paint.
Yes.
So I renew the sense of touch every morning in my sketchbook with ink. And I use the left hand because it can surprise me. I mean, after all these years, the right hand is full of tricks. So the left hand can surprise me what it does.
One thing which really, catch my eyes is when I see your painting, because in Chinese, we always have a word called liu bai. Liu bai means leaving the white space, because each paintings, it cannot be totally covered with paint, because we always believe that you have to find is Taoism, finding the harmony, painted space and the non-painted space. I see many of your works, except those black paintings, it's all with this liu bai. It's one thing that was really, captivated me, because I said, wow, a Western painter that's doing this leaving white space painting, because that was really pretty touching for me.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I always used to leave, however much paint was on the canvas years ago, I always left a bare bit of canvas for Samuel Beckett,
For Samuel,
waiting for Godot,
because these are the things that when we have this when you were doing the shows, your exhibition, your solo exhibition in China, and how to captivate people, because this is a British artist, a woman artist doing British modern art, because at that time before you had the show, no one even knew about British modern. And then when we start saying Francis Bacon, Louise Freud is also British modern art.
What, Louisa?
No, I was just going to ask. I mean, you've seen so many artists. You work with so many artists. I'm obviously a huge fan of Maggie's and have been for many decades, but I'm curious to know what it was when you first saw her work that really struck you, and when in fact you did first see her work, and why you want to work with her and wanted to work with her.
I first saw her work, when we look at the British modern artists, of course, we know about Maggie. And actually, first time I really see very close was when a really good friend, and also she's the biggest fan of Maggie's work, Jane Chow.
Oh, yeah.
Jane Chow. And she did this whole exhibition in Hong Kong. So it was the first time I actually, come close to see the work. And I said, oh my God, it feels like you were doing waves at the time, right? And then I said, wow, it's so much Chinese aesthetic in that. And I thought Jane was very brave at the time, because British modern has been very quiet. It was completely lost to the YBA, and was very quiet. And she actually mounted a show in Hong Kong in an institution. So I thought, wow, it was that really gave me, because it's the first time it comes so close at looking at her work. So at that time I already said, interesting. And then recently, when I saw what is going on, we have several things which is very important: diversity, the woman artist is coming up. And I remember one comment, which when Maggie's show was in China, they said, oh, so when I mentioned that British modern artist Francis Bacon, is there any woman artist doing that movement? I said, of course there are. So they were really surprised about it. And I thought it would be a right time to open a show about Maggie, especially during Art Basel Hong Kong time, because it's not just about Hong Kong. It's about the Asians, it's about the international.
And you're
people
showing
coming
that
in.
great wall of water
Yeah.
painting
Yeah,
in
the
Art
Great Wall
Basel.
of Water is
a new
amazing.
wall of water, isn't it? That's, I mean, it's called Edge XXXX, but you know, there's the sense of it being a revisiting of the sea that's been so important to you, the energy, the turmoil, the tumultuousness.
The sea means something that it's give you a cake. Give you a big cake.
Well, I know in films when you see a couple manoeuvring around each other, and of course there are no bed scenes. They just show the sea, the sea, the sea, the sea. The sea is supposed to be sex, I suppose, in all these films. Yeah, except they show a bit more nowadays.
Nowadays, much more. But there are other series. There's a series called About a Kiss. All right, sex,
Sexy dream.
sexy dreams.
I mean, this new exhibition of yours with Pearl, it's so interesting because it's so full of life and sex and drama. And of course, it comes after, you know, the 2022, you had the terrible heart attack, and then you made your Maelstrom paintings after the heart attack, sort of after the near-death experience. And now it seems with these wonderful, sexy paintings,
and it's colourful.
life, colour. You've really got your mojo back in terms of
Mojo.
that aspect.
Well, I don't know what to say.
Tell us about those sexy paintings, Maggie. What triggered them?
They're all from experience.
Of course. I mean, never doubt a minute about that. But why now to register it? Why didn't you do sexy dreams when you were younger? Why just now?
Well, I remember waking up in the operation in New York. And
after your heart attack?
After my heart attack. And people were doing my chest with their hands, not with machines, they were their hands. And I said to myself, well, either you're going to live or you're going to die. It was quite matter of fact. So, and I went back into another world. But the moment I was out, 6 weeks in hospital, and then back in England. And the second day I was back, I was in the studio again, because you see, the studio is what I call real time, and all the rest is the rest. Whatever happens outside the studio door is just life. But you know, when I'm alone in a studio trying to make something, and that's why I have no sound on or anything like that. I'm trying to listen to what's inside me.
There's inside you always in conversation. Inside you, they're always in conversation with you. And how many inside people you have?
George Melly, who was the host of the television series, said I would go down in art history as Maggi Hambling.
Oh, we must talk about Maggie's TV show.
Gallery.
Gallery. Because recently I was having a dinner with Gregor from Tate, and he said, "Yeah, our generation, we're addicted to this show. Every week we will be watching this show, and Maggi Hambling is my icon." So they're coming to your talks.
It was a great show, though. It was in the 80s, and it was called Gallery, and it was a detail of an artwork was given. It was a quiz show, and a detail was given, and then the panelists had to decide what the detail was and where the work was from. And this wonderful jazz singer, great friend of mine, great friend of Maggie's, was the general MC. And Maggie was the head of one panel, and Frank Whitford the head of the other. And Maggie was absolutely, of course, magnificent, smoking throughout, full of wonderment.
You mean 80s you can smoke in a TV show?
Yeah, smoke in a TV show.
So cool.
and guessing the details. And I remember I was actually on it at one point with Maggie and the art nun, now no longer with us, called Sister Wendy Beckett. So it was me, Maggie, and the nun.
Sister Wendy Beckett.
She was called Sister Wendy Beckett, and she was meant to be a kind of reclusive, solitary nun, but she was very gregarious when we met her, wasn't she, Maggie? And Maggie, I think you wore a dress for the first time in God knows how many years to be on the show with the nun.
Well, I wasn't going to be upstaged by a nun. I remember Louisa had a very tight T-shirt across her tits.
Oh, you were wearing a tight T-shirt, and then
I don't remember this.
Michelangelo and Leonardo and everything going in all directions, and I had the nun next to me, and I remember being in makeup and George Melly coming into the makeup. I said, "George, what are you doing here? You're never here at this time. You're so early." And he said, "I couldn't stand being blessed upstairs one more time."
But it was quite funny because Maggie said to me, "I'm feeling rather nervous, darling." And I'm like, "Maggie, I can't believe this. You're on this show every week. You're resplendent." She said, "No, not the bloody show. I'm wearing a dress for the first time in 25 years.
A gold lemon dress.
Which was worn, I have to say, by Elizabeth Welsh at the end of Derek Jarman's The Tempest. The wonderful singer when she sung Stormy Weather at the end. So you were keeping the tradition.
Google.
It didn't touch me anywhere, this frock, this dress. It had a train. It was extraordinary. And when the man came along with the microphones behind us, and he looked down at my tits and said, "I don't know where we're going to put that this week. I don't know where we're going to put it." And so the first words of Sister Wendy was she leant across, and she was very toothy. She leant across and said, "Don't be so stupid. Put it up through her knickers." And that was the first thing she said to me.
I love it. My God, you guys have fun.
We try.
You guys have fun.
Well, it was always
so
vodka.
much more fun than now.
Yes.
Well, yes, I think the times have changed, but nonetheless, you've got this great show with Pearl, so we're looking forward to hearing more about that.
I would have loved to go to join that show with Sister Beckett,
Wendy Beckett, George Melly.
Beckett.
Also, they had all different guests every week. But Maggie and George and Frank, who was weirdly my old tutor when I was at college, they were like the three mainstays.
And I remember dear Frank came to me one week and said, "I see you get a lot of letters. Is it fan mail?" And I said, "Well, yes, Frank." And so he said, "Well, I don't get any." So I said, well, why don't you try getting something wrong? Nobody likes anyone who's as clever and gets everything right. He said, "Oh, I couldn't do that. And then he started to wear bow ties like me, and he still didn't get any fan letters.
How long did the show goes on?
There were 3 series of it. We made 10 programs in 5 days. So
wow, that's speed.
Yes, we'd go to Manchester to Bristol, HTV Bristol, Harlech Television. Go to Bristol for 5 days, and it was pretty intense. Because Dan,
5 days.
Well, 5 days, 2 programs a day, and they'd just collect the money and run back to the studio.
But also, you weren't just being gorgeous, funny Maggie only. You also had to keep trying to guess these wretched details of the paintings that they were showing in British art collections across the country.
Is it easy?
No, I mean, for instance, Louisa said a little bit, they'd show 1 square inch of a painting, and you're supposed to guess the artist. And for stubs, they did 1 square inch of sky. And of course, I absolutely didn't know what it was. And then the camera went back and there was a dirty great horse. So, of course, everyone in England knew it was Stubbs. It was pretty tricky.
It was tricky.
And the scores were always sort of 95 points to Frank and 3 to Maggie.
No, but we won. Our panel won. Our all-woman panel won. I think because Sister Wendy was rather good at the old art.
Sister Wendy is brilliant.
She was quite good at she had nothing much else to do. She was a reclusive nun in a caravan in Norfolk, so,
In a caravan?
Yes.
She lives in a caravan.
Not anymore, she's dead now.
I mean, she was living in it. What a character.
And drink. My God, she could drink anyone under the table. And we all had this vision of her caravan getting higher and higher and higher from all the empty bottles underneath it.
Maggie, do you think that homosexuality and feminism shape your work?
Not at all.
Not at all.
I mean, sometimes they've had, for instance, the Tate had a show for queer artists. I mean, I think it's irrelevant. I mean, I agree with Picasso when he said we're all partly male and partly female, and you've got to bring the whole thing together to make a work of art. And I think you might as well have shows of people with red hair.
No.
You know, and women's art again. I know I was in the show at the Tate that was just by women, but I mean, it's sort of, when it's just women's art, I think a veil comes down between the person about to go to the show. There's something inside their heads sort of says, well, these are by women. I mean, all that matters is whether the thing's any good or not.
Exactly. I absolutely agree about,
But I also think,
I mean, absolutely agree
I'm
about
being
that.
devil's advocate here because I think feminism, sex, women, it feeds into artworks. But also there are some shows, there's a really good show at Tate Britain at the moment called Women in Revolt, that's a historical show about women from women's art, forgotten women artists, black women, women all over the different parts of the country. And it's a historical show and it puts the spotlight on people who've been long forgotten. So it's a historical show that you can then look at great work that you wouldn't normally see. So I think it's more complicated than that. But I think reductive shows that are just all women or all queer art is too crude, basically.
I really believe that every artist are different. There are artists who wants to express themselves, their political view, their philosophical view, so they do different things. But I don't think that one can judge whether you're good artist or bad artist because you're not making conceptual art.
Well, I think
because conceptual art has to be politics,
all art is conceptual. All art's about
social,
ideas.
because they want artists to talk about politics, society, philosophy.
I think all art is conceptual to an extent because all art is about ideas. All art is about thoughts. Absolutely. But some art zeroes much more in on wonderful boiling brushstrokes and what paint can be made to say or do. Some people work in different media, new technologies. I mean, art is a very broad church, but I think you're right, Maggie. It's got to be good. And of course, how you decide what's good is the absolute gajillion-dollar question. You know, I'm a keen advocate of and he's a terrible old white man, but Andre Breton, the Pope of Surrealism, who said when he saw a great work of art, he felt a cold wind brushing the temple. And I'm a big one for the cold wind brushing the temple. You kind of know in your guts if something's really great. Then you have to think about why you think it's great. And that's a challenge as well in my job.
This is your job, but everybody must have a different opinions, right?
Of course.
But I think the whole world now is, we have 99% are followers. If someone comes and say that your work is great, then everybody will say it's great.
Yes.
Yes, and we have lack of opinions and own individuality, no confidence to say that, disregard whatever people say. I love this.
But also there's fashion. You think of a great artist like Vermeer, you couldn't hardly give them away 150 years ago. I mean, history will out. There's a lot about taste, about subjectivity, of the market, of course. There's a feeding frenzy of some trendy collector suddenly likes a work and shows it in their private collection. But, ultimately I'm quite Darwinian about artwork, but it's got to get seen. And that's why I think it's so good now that, artists of all different ethnic backgrounds, artists from different global continents, women artists that didn't get seen by the predominantly, northern white European American art world. That was the only kind of art that got any airplay. Now it's opened up. But we've still got to judge what's good or not.
With the social media as well. So, Maggie, when you were growing up, being an artist, do you think that being a woman artist, do you feel being discounted?
Well, no, I could never understand all this argument about women's art because in the 60s, when I was an art student, Bridget Riley represented England at the Venice Biennale. So one had that in mind. And I thought, well, why are they making such a fuss?
Yeah, 1960s, already Bridget Riley, wow.
Yeah, but you looked at how many women that were in the collection of national museums. You looked at how many galleries represented women artists. They were minimal. So, a few always got through because they were fantastic. But,
there are much less women artists than male artists as well.
Well, I think there's a whole lot of issues. We could have a whole podcast about it. You've got many more women art students, or as many women art students in art schools as males, but then it falls off. and actually who can make a living from being artists and who gets represented by galleries and collected by museums, it's getting better. But that's when the whole thing changes. And then a whole lot of other stuff comes to play, socioeconomic,
Well, I
having
remember when-
babies, all this
of
stuff.
course.
when I was at Camberwell, there was a stupid feeling that one had to be not only as good as the boys, but better than the boys.
I
Yes,
think
of
that was
course.
legitimate. I
Of
think
course.
you were, not given the same kind of airplay and attention, and quite a lot of sexual attention, I think, in these art schools towards women by the male tutors. But, I think that's a legitimate feeling. I mean, it was not right, but that was the way it was.
The way it was.
But I think it's a different generation. Do you think now we're completely different?
Not completely different, but I think the tide is turning. I look at the work. I mean, in my day, you used to talk about a woman artist. You never talk about a male artist, And I think that doesn't happen anymore. I think things are changing, and certainly in terms of diversity. I mean, it had to take something hideous like the death, the Black Lives Matter, the kicking off of all that, to make the tide change, but it is changing. But a lot of it is socioeconomic. Kids from certain
Socioeconomics,
backgrounds don't have the bank of mum and dad to go to art school. It's not a career where you can make money. It's being discounted, certainly in the British education system. So, it's harder to become an artist if you come from a less privileged background. That's a given.
Of course, and
So,
and also the parents would be pushing you to find
to be a
real
doctor
job,
or a lawyer
real
or
job.
a proper job, a job that has immediate income. So it's very tricky and it's very complicated. And I think the tide is turning, but we have to be super vigilant because there's a long way to go.
Maggie, when you're teaching, when you see your students, do you think that now there are much more women student, female students, and their male student?
Yes, I think there are more female students now, yes.
And are they more determined to be an artist, or they just want to study and have a degree?
Well, I think, if you're going to do it, you're going to do it, even if it's in a lavatory, I mean, people have grand ideas about having big studios and things. But I mean, I think if you're going to do it, it's a compulsion to do
You
it.
have to have
And
determination, tenacious.
when I was 14 and I came top in the art exam at school, and I mean, actually, in that exam, I'd done nothing but flick paint at people and draw attention to myself because I was deeply in love with the biology mistress who was in charge of the exam. Anyway, and I suddenly saw the clock and it was 3:20. And I knew at 3:30 I'd got a hand in a painting, so I did one. And then the results came out and I was top of art. And I thought, this is very odd. I must look into this business. And I remember the art teacher telling me, took me to one side and said, look, however poor you are, you could always afford a bit of paper and a pencil. And that made sense to me.
Wow. And did your parents go against you being an artist?
They weren't terribly keen on the idea, but I'd got them trained by then.
Wow. Wow. I love it. I love
mean,
it. How do you train them? How do you condition them in saying to be supportive of your art career?
Well, my mother always said I was the most obstinate child she'd ever come across, and she was a teacher. And I did ask for the complete works of Oscar Wilde for my 12th birthday.
Yeah, I read about that.
And so
yeah.
I'd got them trained by then.
But I love what you always say about how the role that art plays in your life and the fact that it's your constant companion, the making of art, from when you had the pencil and paper as you were a small child, but that advice that you were given with one of your early mentors.
Yes, and
Brett Haynes.
I remembered Uncle Tom's Cabin. At my first school, Uncle Tom's Cabin was read to us, and the fashion at the time was making patterns in old arithmetic books which were full of squares, and if you had a gold crayon, you were absolutely it. But I remember listening to the what was being read to us, and it was very much about slaves being beaten, and I remember trying to draw the slaves being beaten. So I was always a bit odd.
But you've always said your art is there at your elbow in your
Well,
office.
Henry Moore said it was all therapy, and of course it is all therapy, definitely. And particularly this thing, I mean, why George said Maggi Coffin Hambling, is that when someone dies that you love, I'm think being an artist, I'm very lucky because it's a positive way of grieving. I mean, I painted George merely for 2 years after he died, and all the portraits of him, of course, I'm trying to make as alive as possible.
Yeah.
And I remember when the lorry came to pick up all the paintings to go to this gallery in Manchester, and I came up here the next morning and I looked round and all the walls, there was nothing on the walls. And I said, "You've got to face it, George is dead."
You were very close to George Melly, right?
Yes. Not as quite as close as Louisa, but
Well, I nearly married him, but that was...
Oh, you nearly married him. My God.
I want to ask you, Maggie, about the show at Pearl's called The Night, why you've chosen that title. You were talking about your Maggie Coffin Hambling, but The Night for you
Yeah,
is
why the
something
night?
that's much more intimate and mysterious, it seems. It's not
well,
doom.
when I came top in the art exam when I was 14, and I remember staying up until 2 o'clock in the morning trying to paint the night sky out of my bedroom window. And I took the paintings into school the next day and they were all sort of laid out. And the other girls were just laughing at them. And the art teacher, Yvonne Drury, who was a proper practicing artist, came into the room and I was in the corner on the point of tears. And she said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "Well, I was up till 2 o'clock in the morning trying to paint the night sky and everyone's just laughing at them." And she said, "Look, it has to be water off a duck's back. What anyone ever says about your work, take no notice. You're your own best critic."
Great advice.
This is
fantastic.
great advice.
Fantastic.
Great advice. And such a young age as well.
Yes.
But the night stayed with you in these new works you've been making.
Yes, well, I thought I'd go back to the beginning and try and paint the night sky again. After all, I can't bear to think how many years since I was 14, quite a few.
Do you keep all your work since you were young? Like 14 years old?
No. I mean, I destroy a lot of work. And no, I haven't got many very early things. No, I think it was all thrown away.
Last time when I visited you, you told me that you were having very nice dinner with Cecily Brown, and then you have a heart attack.
Absolutely. I
And
just
then-
had one whiskey and everything went completely blank. And I remember Hugh looking across the room and saying, "Something's happened to Maggie." And then because it was New York, the ambulance came straight away. And I was in Mount Sinai for 6 weeks. So it was all terrible, it was
Does it change you after this besides not smoking?
You'll notice, everyone, that I'm not smoking.
Not smoking.
About the sea paintings, I remember as a child walking into the sea and talking to the sea as if it was my friend. I can't swim, but I walked into the sea and talked to it. And now I try to listen to the sea. Do you see what I mean? It's all changed. And I think I've always worked very hard and been in my studio every day, but obviously as one gets a tiny bit older, there seems like less and less time. And so one has to really go for it.
And then does it change a little with your painting? You always have this death reoccurring themes. What are you think? Do you think about death?
Well, I think about death every day. Yes.
Do you think death is beautiful?
I don't want it to happen yet.
But there's the joke about George Melly calling you Maggie Coffin Hambling. And in the studio, there's a beautiful painting of Henrietta Mrez, one of your great muses, in her coffin. One of your recent shows in Gainsborough's house in Suffolk was very much about matters of death. We have a skull over here. But there seems to be also a very kind of... the energy, even with your paintings of dead people, is still palpably there. So it's a double-edged situation, it seems to me, with this exhibition too being called The Night. But night is the darkness, is something positive and energetic coming out of it as well, it seems.
Thank you.
A pleasure. But just to talk a little bit about that, because I think it is interesting. You had this near-death experience. You made these works. It's run through your work. remembering, knowing about death, but life is absolutely there, and in these sexy new paintings as well.
Yeah, sexy about a kiss, sexy dreams.
Don't know what to say.
You make what you make, but what made you want to make these?
Life dictates what I paint. I mean, the painting of Gulf Women Prepare for War that's in Cambridge. It was a newspaper photograph of these women in the middle of the desert in what seemed to me to be biblical costumes. I mean, you see it everywhere now, but you didn't then in the 80s. And so these three women in seemingly biblical attire practicing with these enormous rocket launchers. And it was just a little black and white photograph in the newspaper, but it impelled me to do something about it. I mean,
So
you
when
can't
you
tell.
see things, it just propel you or inspired you to do.
Yes, and that art teacher at school said the very important thing, that the subject chooses the artist, not the artist the subject.
Oh, it's true.
And then a painting can only move someone else in as much as the artist has been moved when they make it. And the thing about oil paint is, which I think it can do, I mean, in great paintings, Rothko, Cy Twombly, you feel as if you're there at the point of it being made, which is something that oil paint can do, which nothing else can do.
Absolutely.
I mean, there could be very moving photographs, for instance, but inevitably photographs are the recorded moment of just a recorded moment, and it's in history, and they're always behind glass and politely, but it always has happened. Whereas with an oil painting, like the last painting of Titian, I mean, you feel as if you're there while the artist is making it, and I think that's the magic that art can do.
Beautiful. Beautiful way to interpret it.
I mean, we always think, firstly, or I do at least, about Maggie, you with paint, your love affair with paint, the gorgeous, energetic paintings that you make, but also you've made some amazing sculptures. You've made public sculpture, you make private sculptures. In your new show upcoming, there's a revisited version of some of your other sculptures, but painted white, so they become like spectres. And then this other new commission as well with beauty papers, a solid cast silver sculpture. Can you talk a bit about what impels you to make sculpture and how it relates to and how it's different from your paintings? I mean, it's a three-dimensional medium, but you embraced it.
My sculpture always seems to make more fuss than my paintings. I mean, the Oscar Wilde.
The Oscar Wilde.
The Oscar Wilde. I mean, it caused enormous.
Why? Just because you did not put Oscar Wilde on a plinth.
Exactly. He was a man of the people.
Yeah, exactly.
He cared about humanity. I mean, and if to put him up with camp hands on a
he's
pillar.
not these fighting war hero. Yes. One of the things that I read is about, they said, oh, this Oscar Wilde is jumping off, is rising from a coffin. It's not a coffin, right?
It's a sarcophagus, yes.
And then he said, coming up, and it's no respect, and he's not being worshipped. Why should you worship?
But the thing about these sculptures is these are public sculptures, so people, they do cause a huge fuss. It's incredibly brave for artists to put that work out there, but also gajillion more people see them because they're there in the public realm, so people have opinions. And I think
isn't contemporary art is about controversy? Well, I mean, it's great to have controversy.
I think if things are out, the point that I'm making though is that many of Maggie's sculptures are in the private realm, in galleries. They're smaller scale, they're also very large scale, but these few public sculptures are like lightning rods for people's opinions, their prejudices, their feelings about art, life, Oscar Wilde, Benjamin Britten, Mary Wollstonecraft, whoever. And that's a whole other aspect that I think public sculpture has that a more private kind of sculpture doesn't.
I think one of the things I read about Maggie is saying that why she said that you need to have artistic freedom to make public sculpture. Absolutely right, because it's her interpretation of the person, her interpretation of why should people just judge?
Well, no, but I think people are allowed to have their opinions. I think
Well, I
it's
mean,
not great when they don't like it. It's
there's
naggy, but
Creative freedom
it's
is
how
very
people.
important.
But I mean, there's the obvious thing that sculpture confronts people more than paintings. I mean, you
Of
can go
course.
into a gallery and just look around and think, oh, I hate these, and leave. But a sculpture, it shares the space with you looking at it, and so it's more confrontational. I think there were 13 lots of graffiti on Scallop, the one in Aldborough by the sea. 13
Oh, this is
lots.
near you, that, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And
When did you start making sculpture, Maggie?
about 1993.
Quite late on.
Quite late.
Yes, yes. I was painting. It was a series of laugh paintings, and I realised I was trying more and more to paint an object in space. So I started to try and make the objects in space. And the latest one, the Mary Wollstonecraft.
Wollstonecraft.
Yes, and it's a naked figure. And a friend of mine,
Is it naked silver figure?
well, at the top of the sculpture there is a naked woman confronting the world. Yes, and it's for Mary Wollstonecraft. It's not of Mary Wollstonecraft. And a great friend of mine, the writer Paul Bailey, always watches the Channel 4 news, which finishes at 8 o'clock. And I remember that Tuesday when the sculpture sort of hit the world, he telephoned me and said, "My God," he said, "you have put the pussy among the pigeons this time." Which was great. And I was leaving my local Waitrose that same week, and one of the very jolly Suffolk ladies gave me a big grin and said, "Been making trouble again, I see." But I don't set out to be controversial, it just happens. But if it's controversial, it shows it's got a bit of life to it.
I think controversy is great.
I agree.
You mean you have everybody talking about it? Why not? This is free advertisement. I think that's the greatest thing, because you makes people think. It create a topic for discussion.
Yeah.
And it's really important, I think, in this world. You have to see something and people has to feel and they have to discuss whether you agree or
Well,
not.
art's part, as I said before, art's part of life. You
Yeah.
know, good, bad, ugly, warts and all. And I think people encounter it, and the more people that can encounter art, the better it is for them,
Absolutely.
whatever their feelings or responses.
I think it will be very exciting that Maggie is showing the paintings and sculpture together in Hong Kong. So I think it brings, I really hope that, the international people are coming back this time at Basel, because it will be more international. It will be a great platform for a Chinese gallery to do, a Hong Kong gallery to do British modern. There's none of the, galleries and a woman artist.
But British, it's so interesting though, isn't it, that, Maggie made regular pilgrimages to the British Museum, looking at ink, calligraphy, Chinese, Japanese paintings, but also many people have commented that many of Maggie's sculptures have a kind of affinity to Chinese scholar stones.
But actually, when you walk into her exhibition in the museum, you don't know whether this is by a Chinese artist. Or not, then they say, "Oh, it's a British artist. Oh my God."
They have a lot of hair.
Lots of it. Yeah, she was on all these social media is with her. Everybody was taking pictures with her, all on the social media. And it's quite funny, actually.
I remember the last selfie I had to do, I had to hold a teddy bear. I thought, this is really the end.
That's the price of fame, Maggie.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the two ladies. And I feel so honored to have you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm very excited about the show.